Where am I? And who are you?
I am your daddy.
Oh, really?
She, given out box.
Wait, why am I here?
Baby, I am about to lay down some history. The Inca Empire was the largest empire in pre-Columbian America. The administrative, political and military center of the empire was located in Cusco in modern-day Peru. The Inca civilization arose from the highlands of Peru sometime in the early 13th century.
Wow. That's very interesting. Tell me more.
There were many local forms of worship, most of them concerning local sacred huacas, but the Inca leadership encouraged the worship of Inti, the sun god, and imposed its sovereignty above other cults such as that of Pachamama. The Incas considered their king, the Sapa Inca, to be the child of the sun.
How did the Inca people worship gods?
Huacas, sacred sites or things, were widespread around the Inca Empire. Huacas were deific entities that resided in natural objects such as mountains, boulders, streams, battlefields, other meeting places, and any type of place that was connected with past Incan rulers. Huacas could also be inanimate objects such as pottery that were believed to be vessels carrying deities. Spiritual leaders in a community would use prayer and offerings to communicate with a huaca for advice or assistance. Human sacrifice was a part of Incan rituals in which they usually sacrificed a child or a slave. The Incan people thought it was an honor to die for an offering.
I can't believe I didn't know any of this. What was their culture like?
Inca officials wore stylized tunics that indicated their status. It contains an amalgamation of motifs used in the tunics of particular office holders. For instance, the black and white checkerboard pattern topped with a red triangle is believed to have been worn by soldiers of the Inca army. Some of the motifs make reference to earlier cultures, such as the stepped diamonds of the Huari and the three-step stair-step motif of the Mohawk.
Type here to make me say something. Drag and drop icons into the text to make me do stuff. Change who is talking by adding a new text box using the plus button.
The Inca were a conquering society, and their expansionist assimilation of other cultures is evident in their artistic style. The artistic style of the Inca utilized the vocabulary of many regions and cultures, but incorporated these themes into a standardized imperial style that could easily be replicated and spread throughout the empire. The simple abstract geometric forms and highly stylized animal representation in ceramics, wood carvings, textiles and metalwork were all part of the Inca culture. The motifs were not as revivalist as previous empires. No motifs of other societies were directly used with the exception of Huari and Tiwanaku arts.
Music was part of ceremony. Incas knew how to smelt and cast metals, so they made many different types of instruments such as trumpets and bells out of materials such as brass or stone.
Women were an essential part of Inca society. Their principal role in society was to care for their children, cook, weave, make chicha beer and work at the fields. However, they had many other household duties, such as cleaning, to make their lives after marriage very busy. Incan women were typically married at the age of 16. In Inca society, due to economic regulations, men of lower rank could only have one wife. The aristocracy, starting with the Curaca, were allowed to engage in polygamy.
Inca childhood was harsh by today's standards. When a child was born, the Inca would wash the baby in cold water and wrap it in a quilt. Later, the baby was put in a pit in the ground as a simple playground. By around age 1, the baby could expect to receive very severe discipline. At age 14, boys earned a loincloth in a ceremony to mark their manhood. Boys from noble families were subjected to many different procedures of endurance and knowledge. After the test, they received earplugs and a weapon, the color of which represented rank in society.
Inca society was made up of ailes, which were clans of families who lived and worked together. Each aile was supervised by a curaca or chief. Families lived in thatched roof houses built of stone and mud. Furnishings were unknown, with families sitting and sleeping on the floor. Potatoes were a basic Inca food. The imperial Incas clothed themselves in garments made from alpaca, and many of their religious ceremonies involved the animal. They wore sandals on their feet. In Inca social structure, the ruler, Sapa Inca, and his wives, the Coyas, had supreme control over the empire. The high priest and the army commander-in-chief were next. Then came the four appas, the regional army commanders. Next were temple priests, architects, administrators and army generals. Next were artisans, musicians, army captains and the quipakimeak, the Incan accountants. At the bottom were sorcerers, farmers, herding families and conscripts.
This is amazing. Where the Inca now?
At the height of its existence, the Inca Empire was the largest nation on Earth and remains the largest native state to have existed in the Western Hemisphere. The wealth and sophistication of the legendary Inca people lured many anthropologists and archaeologists to the Andean nations in a quest to understand the Incas' advanced ways and what led to their ultimate demise. With the arrival from Spain in 1532 of Francisco Pizarro and his entourage of mercenaries or conquistadors, the Inca Empire was seriously threatened for the first time. Duped into meeting with the conquistadors in a peaceful gathering, an Inca emperor, Atahualpa, was kidnapped and held for a ransom. After paying over $50 million in gold by today's standards, Atahualpa, who was promised to be set free, was strangled to death by the Spaniards, who then marched straight for Cuzco and its riches.
So their entire society was destroyed.
Sadly, yes, the Inca civilization only lasted 100 years.
Thank you so much for teaching me about the Inca. Can you take me home now?
You ain't going nowhere.